Wagwan peeps, hello, hola, welcome to my channel. So this is for all my Caribbean peeps who, you love your little true crime, and we just weren't getting that enough representative from the YouTubers. You love your little Caribbean accent, so I am here to bridge that gap. And also for those outside of the Caribbean who also love that Caribbean accent and you love your little true crime content, well, this is the page for you. Yeah, you're welcome. I'm here to bridge that gap. My name is Anicia Robinson. So if you're interested in that kind of content, you definitely want to like, subscribe, and share. Help a girl out, yeah? Help a girl out. So if you're just passing through, you're not so much of a lover of true crime and you're just passing through, we're happy to have you. You can still leave a like. You can still press the like button and help me out too. We're happy to have you, and hopefully you can come back many more times, and who knows, maybe you'll be joining the family very soon. Alright, so for my first video and my first case, we will be discussing the case of the alphabet murders, aka the double initial murders. The events of this case, what is most frightening is the fact that this case remains unsolved even though it happened 50 years ago. Older than me and almost older than my father, like yeah, this case has been opened for a while. So just a disclaimer, this case does involve child abuse, sexual attack, and some instances of suicide, so viewers' discretion is advised. If any of this content is a trigger for you, this may not be the video for you, so you may want to take your exit at this time. Sad to see you go, but everyone mental health and your health overall matters. So case of the alphabet murders are a series of murders that took place in the 1970s, specifically the 1971 to 73. These murders took place in Rochester, New York. Now, this community at the time was considered a safe and a quiet place. It had a population of nearly 300,000 persons. Because of its location being so close to the Genesee River, it actually became one of America's first boom cities. It was a safe place not only for kids but also for adults. The adults in that community were very trusting of each other. However, that would change following the traumatic incidents that took place in the neighborhood. So beside the fact that all three victims were murdered in Rochester, New York, all three victims also had alliterative names. But just a point to note is that in the 1970s, it was basically a trend to have double initial names. For example, Marilyn Monroe, she had double M and she was a famous actress. Similarity is the fact that all three girls were living in a single parent household. So all of the girls were living with their mother. They all came from a low economic background. All three girls were preteen with ages either 10 or 11. All three girls had been abducted, sexually attacked, strangled, and their bodies left in an area beginning with the letter of their initial. The first victim of the case is Carmen Colon, who was born on January 8, 1971 in Puerto Rico. She had spent a brief time with her family in Puerto Rico before moving to Rochester, New York. She was 10 years old. Her teachers described her as a happy girl who was full of energy and always smiling. Carmen was slower than the other students in her grade. However, Carmen was slower than the other kids in her grades, and this is kind of understandable because remember, she's coming from Puerto Rico, which is a Spanish-speaking country, and she moved to the US, which now speaks English. So of course there was some language barrier. So despite her being a little slower than the other children, her classmates loved her and they looked after her. On November 16, 1971, Carmen had offered to run to the pharmacy to go get a prescription for her sister Louise, who was 11 months at the time, because her sister was suffering from an ear infection and only her medications could basically soothe her. So she asked her mother. At first, her mother did decline the offer, but Carmen was basically relentless. So after about the third or fourth ask, her mother caved in and allowed her to run to the pharmacy, because after all, the pharmacy was just a block and a half away from their home. So she was thinking that it would just be a quick errand for her to run and get the prescription. So after her mother agreed, Carmen headed to the door in the last outfit she would ever pick for herself. She picked out a red sweater, a green pants, and a white sneakers, and this she paired with a long wool red coat. At approximately 4:30 p.m., Carmen was seen entering the pharmacy. Jack Corbin, who was both the cashier and the owner at the pharmacy at the time, took the prescription number from Carmen and also her mother's Medicaid card. Due to the amount of paperwork that had to be done, Jack Corbin told Carmen to come back in half an hour, and at that time the medicine would be ready. Carmen neither returned to the store, neither did she return home. So it was getting late, and one of her uncles, Antonio Colon, became worried. So he went out to search for her before the sun went down. However, there was no sign of Carmen. And as the evening progressed, more and more family members became concerned about Carmen not returning home. So they joined the search with her uncle in looking for Carmen. And even with more searching taking place, even with more eyes, there was still no sign of Carmen. At 7:50 p.m., the family called the police and Carmen was officially missing. Just 2 days after Carmen's disappearance, the family would receive devastating news about their little girl. Two teenage boys, Jim and Mark, while hiking, discovered in a ditch what looked like a doll that had been tossed from a car window. When the boys went in to take a deeper look at the doll, it turned out it was the body of a little girl. Obviously, the boys were shaken up and they frantically left the scene. They rode all the way to Jim's dad's house, where they recounted to his dad what they had just seen. And of course, Jim's dad then called the police. Remains were later confirmed to be that of Carmen Colon, who was found in a wooden area off Stearns Road off the Churchville exit. Now, here is where the story gets crazy. The shocker, the most outrageous part of the case basically, is that just 1 hour, one dege hour after Carmen's abduction, dozens of drivers, maybe even up to 100 drivers that were commuting along the Interstate 490, saw a little girl who was naked from the waist down running down the Highway West, which was about 1 to 2 miles away from the Churchville exit. And what's crazy is that no one stopped. No one stopped to find out what was happening. Why was a little girl who was half naked running across the highway? Of course, it's an unusual sight. So, that is weren't they concerned at all? So basically they saw this little girl along the highway running, waving her arms and screaming. I don't know how she would have gone out of the abductor's car, but somehow she did. And I can't imagine the glimpse of hope she was probably feeling at that time, having escaped and hoping to see that somebody's gonna see me, somebody's gonna rescue me. And hope was quickly snatched away because no one stopped to save her. And I can't imagine how her little heart must have just fell to the ground. All hope was now lost. Just moments later after this incident, her abductor was seen reversing towards her, who eventually left the vehicle and brought her back to the car. Now, could this story get any worse? Yeah, it could. Because even though so many persons had seen that strange girl running along the highway, not only did they not stop, but they also did not report the matter until 3 days later. But it was too late because Carmen's body was already found. Carmen's body was found. So, you mean to tell me that you see something strange? Yeah, we kind of forgive you, say maybe you didn't stop, maybe you were in a rush, you were focused on getting home, but it take you 3 whole days for make the report to the police. That's crazy. That is crazy to me. And I'm pretty sure that all those commuters at the time who saw the girl and found out that eventually she was found murdered, I'm sure they must be feeling guilty to know that if they had stopped, maybe that girl would have been saved. Maybe Carmen would have been saved. Sadly, the sighting of Carmen on the Interstate 490 would have been the last time she would ever be seen alive. But this part of the case is it's still so bizarre to me, because I'm thinking, why couldn't have anybody stop? Couldn't they obviously see that this little girl was in distress? She was basically begging for somebody to just stop and rescue her. But this didn't happen. Carmen's funeral was held on Monday, November 22, 1971. Nearly 200 persons were in attendance in the mass funeral, which service was delivered in Spanish. Carmen was then buried in the Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. Murder of Carmen, police was on the case, trying to find out what happened to Carmen, who had killed Carmen. However, 3 months after Carmen's murder, the tips and the witnesses, they started to dwindle, and a local group called the Citizens for a Decent Community, they basically came together to put up billboards where Carmen was last seen but not saved. The billboard was 8 feet tall with a photo of Carmen, and it read, "Do you know who killed Carmen? Please help before it happens again. Rewards for information total $6,000." It's made by the CDC caused the investigation to be revamped, and the sheriff at the time reported that the station had started to receive more calls and letters again not long after the billboards were erected. Of Carmen sent shockwaves throughout the Rochester area, and it created a time of unrest. The once quiet and safe neighborhood where kids could play and run errands was now filled with fear. Parents no longer had the luxury of feeling careless or feeling comfortable in having their kids out. This event would only be the precursor for what was to come, that would shake the community of Rochester, New York for over the next 3 years. 18 months after Carmen's death, there was yet another double initial girl that walked out of her house for the very last time. This would be the second victim, who was Wanda Walkowitz. She was born on August 4th, 1971. She lived with her family, which consisted of her mother and her 2 sisters, in an apartment on Avenue D, which is in a poorer neighborhood in the eastern Rochester area. Wanda was described as being emotionally mature for her age. She had to do way more than most other kids, so this led to her often missing school to take care of things at home. She was described as a fierce little redhead. There were stories of her that she would even take on the boys at school and beat the hell out of them. But she was also described as a happy and a smart and an athletic little girl. Despite her small frame and her height, Wanda was known to be a fighter. And as we get more into Wanda's case, we'll definitely see the difference in Wanda's case versus the other. So above all of the other descriptions or characteristics of Wanda, she was most known for being dependable and tough. Her mother, Joyce, who became a widow in her early 20s when Wanda's dad passed due to a heart attack. Of Wanda's dad led to her mother, Joyce, becoming an alcoholic who got into many relationships. So this type of lifestyle was definitely not providing a stable home for neither Wanda nor her 2 other sisters. It was April 2, 1973. Wanda was at home that afternoon filling out her coloring book on the family's floor. Heard her mother cursing that their cabinets were emptied. At the sight of her mother's distress, Wanda offered to go buy the groceries for her mother at the Hillside Deli, which was just 3 blocks away from their home on Conkey Avenue. Joyce, figuring that this will just be a quick little trip, a quick little A quick little errand for her daughter allowed her to go. Said goodbye to her daughter as Wanda walked out the house at approximately 5:30, wearing a white dress and a red and green checkered coat. It was getting late, and Joyce noticed that Wanda had not returned home. Being worried and a concerned mother, the first thing she did was to phone up the Rochester Police Department to report her daughter missing. But the officer in whom she would have spoken to such a Joyce that she'd take a walk around the community to see if there was any signs of Wanda before panicking. Approximately 8 p.m., Joyce, who was anxious and clearly stressed at the time, she left home and decided to walk around the community to see if she would see Wanda. And she was just thinking that she was going to yell at Wanda, then hug her out of relief, and then go home and make dinner. But sadly, Wanda was not there. No one had seen Wanda since that afternoon. When Joyce heard this, she called the Rochester Police Department once more, and this time they responded with an official neighborhood search. True crime lovers, we do know that the first 48 hours in a missing person case is the most intense and the most vital, because as the time goes on, the clues are reduced, witnesses' memory starts to fade, and potential crime scene is at risk of losing its purity and the victim's trail weakened. Minutes of Joyce phoning the police, they went to the hillside deli where Wanda was last seen. There, the workers who would have had some conversation with Wanda said that Wanda asked that everything be put in a bag, and they told the clerk to hurry up basically because she was in a hurry. What the clerk mentioned that they didn't pay Wanda's hurry as something that was out of the usual, because she'd often come in and say that she was in a hurry. Despite her struggle in carrying that heavy bag out of the store, it was said that Wanda seemed to be in a pretty good mood. And this was pretty typical for Wanda. Later, witnesses confirmed to seeing Wanda struggling with the bag outside. They saw Wanda putting the bag on her hip against the fence to get it upright just before she vanished. As the night went on and the investigation accelerated, out of fear that Wanda was truly gone, Joyce had to be treated for emotional distress and shock at the Rochester General Hospital. Next day, April 3rd, a state trooper, Thomas Zimmer, was doing an early morning patrol on Route 104 when he saw something that caught his eye. This was just west of the Iron Decorator Bay Bridge. On a brown hillside lay what appeared to be a ghost-like figure. Curious about what he had seen, he stepped out of his vehicle and went over to investigate. As he looked down what was an embankment, he saw a pale red-headed girl lying very still. She was found 17 hours after her disappearance. Wanda Walkowitz's body was the fastest discovery out of the 3 double initial murder victims. She was found 7.5 miles where she was last seen and presumably abducted just outside the deli. After Zimmer's discovery of Wanda's body, he called the police, who quickly came to the scene to investigate. After Wanda's death, persons started making the connection between her death and that of Carmen. Wanda's autopsy report revealed that there were marks of ligature on her neck, suggesting that she may have been strangled from behind, while Carmen had been strangled while looking into the eyes of her killer. Unlike Carmen, there was enough DNA for a profile to be created from Wanda. Wanda's autopsy confirmed that she was also sexually attacked. It was also revealed that Wanda had custard in her stomach, and this proved to be a very vital clue in the case, since she had not consumed any at home. It is believed that Wanda's killer must have fed her or given her food just before he carried out the gruesome act. The revelations of this case resulted in Wanda's mother reacting to say that she would not have eaten from a stranger based on Wanda's personality. It is also believed that Wanda would not have gone into the car with someone she does not know. I know this person. A week followed by the police were working around the clock with pretty much not much to work with. They had walked around the community, questioned neighbors, but no one had seen Wanda get into a car. She had not been seen between the time she had been abducted and sexually attacked and murdered. It was as if she had just vanished. Police also questioned persons who were around the deli at the time, and they had described cars and person they had seen, but did not reveal any significant evidence or clues except just one. The night before Wanda was abducted, one local came forward to state a man in a Ford LTD attempted and failed to lure two adolescent girls into his car. The witness described the man as being around 30 years old, about 6 feet tall, who was wearing a long black coat and had a black beard. Also had a mole on his forehead. The profile of Wanda's killer was then put together by Dr. David Barry of the University of Rochester. In the early 1970s, most investigators were not yet on board with the practice of profiling. The detective preferred facts and evidence that they could look at. Profiling attempted to draw conclusions about a murderer based on the how and the why, from which one might eventually deduce a who. Once again, the Citizens for a Decent Community raised funds to put up yet another billboard, and this time it had Wanda Walkowitz's face. The billboard said, "It happened again. Who killed Wanda Walkowitz? Rewards of information totaled $10,000. And again, because the billboards were erected, this led to about 200 phone calls coming almost immediately after the billboards were put up. In addition to this, investigators re-interviewed all those suspects that had been questioned in Carmen's case, which was also still open. In the news, Wanda became the little redhead from Avenue D. Wanda's funeral was held on Friday, April 6. She was buried in a small white and gold casket that was adorned with petite flowers. Her final resting place was the Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, just like Carmen. Now there were 2 children that had been slain, and there was no immediate hope of investigators catching who the killer was. So this led to Rochester becoming increasingly intense. And this anxiety blew up into frantic fear when yet another, this being the 3rd victim of the double initial murder, was found dead. Just 6 months later after Wanda's death, a 3rd victim, Michelle Mienza, was found. Michelle was 10 years old. She was born on November 1961 and lived in Webster Crescent, which was a dead end off Webster Avenue. She lived with her mother and her brother and attended the Audubon School 33. On the day of Michelle's disappearance, November 26, 1973, Michelle had spent more than half the school day crying in the nurse's office. She had run in shortly after recess to take refuge from all the teasing she was experiencing that day. Being that she was a little slower and heavier than most of her classmates, this led to Michelle enduring a lot of teasing and bullying. Afternoon, Michelle and her bully had been forced to stay after school. Carolyn Mienza, Michelle's mother, was waiting in a long queue of cars for her daughter because, unknowing to her that Michelle could not leave at the time, she was in the queue waiting for Michelle. But shortly after, a teacher came out to say that Michelle could not leave at this point. Then, realizing that she had forgotten her purse at the store, drove back, leaving Michelle to walk home by herself. Neighbors consider Caroline to be a good mother. She was known to be one who knew exactly where her kids were and who they were hanging out with. Unlike Caroline, to let Michelle walk home by herself. But a lot of kids in the neighborhood did it all the time, so Caroline figured that Michelle would be fine just for today. But sadly, this would not be the case. Around 3:20 p.m. after a shift at a local gas station, her uncle Phil Mienza saw Michelle walking home from school with her head down and her red cheeks wiping snot away from her sleeve. So he pulled over, rolled down his window and offered her a ride. Michelle declined his offer as she wanted to walk home. Understandable, she probably just wanted to clear her head, and that walk home would have given her the opportunity. As Michelle had declined Phil's offer, Phil drove home with hopes that Michelle would feel better upon arriving at home. Approximately 10 minutes later, it was reported that a classmate of Michelle saw her sitting in the passenger seat of a car at Webster Avenue at Ackerman Street. Classmate did not recognize the man driving, but it was definitely not Michelle's dad. She had stepped in the crosswalk just a little too early and had to jump back before the car Michelle was seeing him could hit her. Other cars were there swerving and screeched just to avoid an accident. Because the car Michelle was driving in did not come to a stop, neither did it slow down. It sped right away. That afternoon at about 5:40 p.m., Carlin Mienza called the Rochester Police Department to report Michelle missing. She was so upset to the point that the officer had to be asking her several times to repeat what she was seeing. This is quite understandable because remember, Carlin had gone to pick up Michelle. So if she had gotten Michelle, clearly she would not have been missing. The police on the other end of the phone call was also overheard Carlin being overly hard on herself, saying if she had just brought her home. After hearing about Michelle's life at school, the police initially thought that maybe Michelle had run away due to the hard time that she was experiencing in school. But with Wanda's case still fresh in the county's mind, they quickly dismissed the idea. The police drove around that night, slowing by railings and ditches just to see if there were any sightings of Michelle. Phil, having been the last person to see Michelle, was interrogated by the police, and he was overcome with an intense guilt. He was also heard saying he should have brought her home. At that point, he knew that she would have been safe if she had just come in the car with him. The day after Michelle's disappearance, there was still no sign of her. Carolyn had to be taken to the hospital for emotional distress, just like Joyce when Wanda had gone missing. There she was given a strong sedative and escorted back home to rest. Just 2 days after Michelle's disappearance, the fire chief was driving the station's newest truck down the Eddy Road in the town of Macedon when he saw something on the side of the road that his brain couldn't quite process. Being curious, he pulled over and went to investigate just to be sure of what he had seen. When he looked, he saw a girl who was on her side and her eyes were open and her ears was to the ground. The remains of the little girl was later confirmed to be that of Michelle Mienza. Her body was found in Macedon. Michelle's autopsy revealed that she had been sexually attacked and then strangled from behind. There were remnants of cheeseburger that was found in Michelle's stomach. Based on the largely undigested remnants, it is believed that Michelle ate approximately 90 minutes before she was attacked. Sounds familiar, right? Because if you recall, Wanda had also eaten or had been fed by her attacker before the act was committed. Semen was found on Michelle's underwear and body. However, this was not enough for a DNA profiling to be done. Based on the evidence found, investigators believe that the man seen on November 26, 1973 was Michelle's murderer and most likely the murderer of the two other girls. The police interviewed several witnesses, and this led to the police creating a composite sketch of what the suspect may look like, and this sketch was eventually released to the public. Investigation into the three girls suggested that Wanda and Michelle must have shared the same killer, but perhaps Carmen did not. This is because the MO of Carmen's killer, which is basically the strangulation face to face, didn't quite match up with the method used in the killer's final hour with Wanda and Michelle, which were nearly identical. Because if you recall, both had been strangled from behind. Autopsy revealed an undigested final meal. Both had been sexually attacked, abducted in a suburb, and abandoned in a rural area. Let's get into the suspect at this time. In the case of Carmen, Miguel Colon would be one of the first persons strongly suspected. Despite no admission of guilt, the evidence stacked against him and his actions were compelling enough for Miguel to be considered a suspect. Miguel was a brother of Carmen's father, Justiano, and following the separation of Carmen's parents, he became known as Uncle Miguel. On the day of Carmen's disappearance, she visited the local pharmacy alone, which was an uncommon occurrence since she was usually accompanied on these routine visits. Depending on how close Miguel was with the family and assuming that he knew of these routine pharmacy visits, this would have been the perfect time for him to strike. Another clue came in when the dark-colored Ford Pinto that was seen driving in reverse on the Interstate 490 highway in pursuit of Carmen. It came out that Miguel also owned a similar. This car was suspiciously similar to the car Miguel purchased just a few weeks before her abduction and her murder. Of the correlation between the two cars, Miguel's car was extensively searched by investigators and their findings were telling. Look at this. Investigators discovered that his car was clean both inside and out, and the trunk had been thoroughly gone through with a strong cleaning solution. Suspicious, right? This was clearly a very strange finding considering that this vehicle was newly purchased. So, of course, the investigators investigating the case questioned the car dealership about this habit, and it was revealed that the dealership did not clean the trunk of Miguel's car. This means that Miguel must have cleaned the car himself with a strong cleaning solution, or he hired someone to clean it for him. But wait, that's not it. There was also a doll belonging to Carmen that was found in Miguel's backseat. However, this in itself was not too outstanding because it is said that Carmen frequently traveled with her uncle, and if she's using toys, it's likely that it could have been left there after one of her trips with her uncle. And if these were not suspicious enough, it is the events that follow these findings what cemented Miguel as a suspect for Carmen, a prominent suspect at that. Just 4 days after his niece's death, Miguel fled the country, relocating from Rochester back to Puerto Rico. Now, you tell me if that's not suspicious. Talk truth. And this was just 2 days after Carmen's death. And before leaving, it is alleged that he communicated with a close friend that he had to leave the country because he had done something wrong. Was this last clue a clear indication that Miguel was directly involved in the death of Carmen? Because of this clue, investigators in March 1972 traveled to San Juan to question Miguel, but they would have had their plans disrupted when a local newspaper article prematurely provided Miguel with details of their intent. Now, this unintentional tip gave Miguel a head start once again to evade authorities. But on March 26, 1972, he was eventually caught. Following Miguel's surrender, he was extradited to Rochester for questioning. When he was questioned about his whereabouts on the date of his niece's murder, Miguel failed to provide a credible alibi, and his claimed whereabouts could not be ratified by any individual. Though these were very strong evidence against Miguel, there was no significant evidence that would result in him being convicted of the murder of Carmen. This led to Miguel basically living the remainder of his life as a free man until 1991. In 1991, in a fit of jealousy and financial distress, Miguel shot his wife and his brother, Justiano. Following this, Miguel took his own life. Despite all the drama and the violence, the Colon family believed that Miguel was not Carmen's killer. James Barber was another suspect, and at the time of the murders, it is said that he did not use the automated punch-in system. Barber also had a warrant out for him because he had assaulted a 15-year-old girl in Ohio. Shortly after Carmen's murder, Barbara fled the country, and there was no evidence that ultimately lined up with Barbara being guilty of the crime. Another suspect in the Alphabet murder was Kenneth Benanchi. He was suspected to be involved in the Alphabet murders because before the 1975, which is before he had moved to LA, Benanchi lived in Rochester, New York. It reported that Kenneth worked as an ice cream vendor in the Rochester area. Two of the locations in which he had worked is said to be locations that were near both Wanda and Carmen's murder scene. Kenneth had moved to Los Angeles in 1976, where he and his cousin Angelo committed a string of murders that took the life of 10 young girls in LA. He was arrested in 1979 with 7 counts of first-degree murder for the murders that took place in LA. But with insufficient evidence to link Kenneth to the Alphabet murders, and this combined with his denial for the murders on multiple occasions, he was never charged. Joseph Naso was another suspect. During the 1970s, he was a Rochester native, and he was known to regularly travel between California and New York. And because of the shocking similarities between his choice of double initial victims in California, Nassau was also suspected to be the Alphabet murderer. When questioned about the similarities about both these cases and the meaning behind his victim's double initial, Nassau described the choice as it being just a coincidence. Another clue that made police suspect of Nassau for the Alphabet murders is the fact that he was known to offer his unsuspecting victims a ride, which is much like how the police believed Chester Alphabet murder operated. The convincing evidence that piled against Nassau, law enforcement then requested a DNA comparison. When his DNA was tested against the semen samples collected from the body of Wanda, the results came back negative. Another suspect was Dennis Termini, who was a 25-year-old Rochester firefighter, yet another strong suspected culprit behind the Alphabet murders. On January 1, 1971, this was just 5 weeks after the death of Michelle Mienza, Termini failed to abduct a teenage girl. When the girl had refused to enter his vehicle, Termini threatened her at gunpoint. However, his plan fell through once again because the teenage girl began to scream at the top of her lungs. Despite his countless efforts to send threats, the girl belted out, "She refused," and just thank God that she did. Now, her action resulted in Termini fleeing the scene. Being unsatisfied by his failed attempt, Termini sought out yet another potential victim who was nearby. This time, his abduction attempt would result in his pursuit by law enforcement. Police witnessed Termini's second abduction attempt and tried to apprehend him. Termini was able to briefly evade capture, but ultimately, the police were able to regain his trail and eventually left him cornered with no place to turn. Upon realizing that his back was against the wall and just before police could successfully arrest Termini, he turned the gun on himself and, like a coward, proceeded to take his own life. During Termini's short encounter with law enforcement, a horrifying truth would then be revealed about the 25-year-old Rochester firefighter. It was revealed that Termini was known as the Garage Rapist, who was a prolific serial rapist who committed over a dozen attacks targeting teenage girls and young women between 1971 and 1973. The evidence would be discovered that further promoted the idea that Termini was indeed responsible for the Alphabet murder. He was known to live on Brock Street, which was less than a mile from where Michelle Mienza was last seen. And when the police searched his vehicle, a map was discovered folded, opened, and marked to the place where Michelle's body was discovered. Further to this, Termini also owned a white cat, which was a defining evidence that linked both Wanda and Michelle's cases together. Fortunately, due to the profile of his victims, most of them be ranging between 18 and 24, there was doubt that he was actually responsible for the Alphabet murder. In 2007, following the testing of a DNA sample from Termini's exhumed body, it was compared with that of the semen sample that was found on Wanda's body. It revealed that Termini was not responsible for Wanda's death. Although, due to a lack of evidence from Carmen Colon and Michelle's Nienza body, an official ruling is unable to be provided in their cases. Police say there wasn't any physical evidence from the bodies of the other two victims to be compared with that of Termini's DNA. As recent as 2020, another suspect came to surface, and this came as a result of TikToker Alexis Ortiz, who came out to say that she believed her grandfather was the Alphabet murderer. However, DNA testing turned out to be negative. I will have her video linked so you may go and watch it. And she basically had made the connection, or she came out first due to similarities that she thought this case had with that of her grandfather. With so many years that pass, it is quite possible that the monster that committed these crimes may have also passed. However, with newer improvements in DNA testing, we are really hoping that one day we will find out who the perpetrator for these heinous crimes were. We have come to the end of your case, and I want to know your views. Do you think the double initials were merely a coincidence? Do you think the perpetrator is still alive? Do you think Wanda knew her killer? Do you think the investigators are right to say that Carmen MO is different from that of Wanda and Michelle, so they most likely be coming from two very different suspects? I want to know your views. You can leave them in the comment section. Thank you for watching, and by the way, I will have all my sources linked below, so if you want to do further readings, you can definitely do that on your own. Thanks for watching. Bye.